Hi, and welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman. Today we're going to be talking about the women's campaign school called Run Jane Run, which I think has some very interesting both stories of its development and potential for the future, both here in Grey Bruce and across this country. My guests are former Mayor of Waterloo, Brenda Halloran, and Kimberly Love, who is one of the people who was one of the founders of Run Jane Run here in Grey Bruce. Kimberly, Brenda, good to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks.
Now, Run Jane Run, we've probably all seen the newspaper articles and so on. Maybe we might have known somebody who went there to the Run Jane Run campaign school. What is Run Jane Run?
Well, Run Jane Run is a municipal campaign school for women. It got its origin after I had attended, and Brenda actually was one of the attendees as well, a similar municipal campaign school in Waterloo Region. That was back in 2005. And the idea of that was to ensure that women had the tools that they needed to run successfully for municipal office in what was then going to be a campaign year. Now, having come up into the Grey County area, we thought 4 years ago we needed to see more women running in rural councils. So we had the idea for a municipal campaign school for women. The reason we chose the name Run Jane Run is, of course, it harkens back to the See Dick Run, Run Dick Run, See Jane Run.
I'm old enough
Run,
to remember
Jane,
those.
Run. And that was a period of time in which I think women's role was quite tightly scripted. And we want to sort of set that on its head and say women have a role not only in the House, but also, you know, in the political house.
In the house. With a capital H.
Yeah. So Run Jane Run was deliberate, and you can take a look at some of our imagery as well. But Run Jane Run originated here in Grey Bruce, that particular school, and our objective is to see if we can get to women on council. Our first run was quite successful, so we'll see how this one goes.
What were the numbers on your first time through? Do you remember?
Yeah, well, I don't think we've got exact numbers. We had about the same number of participants. I think maybe between 27 and 30 participants. I think we did about the same this time round. And I know that we had 2 women mayors elected out of that school. So several of the women who came to the campaign school won their seats. And the 2 women mayors, one of them had never run for office before, but she was provided with the tools, and she became a mayor in her first time run at political office. And the other became a mayor up in South Bruce Peninsula. By coincidence, the way it happened, both of those women, graduates of the campaign school, unseated the sitting wardens in those 2 counties in both Grey and Bruce.
Yes, that's right.
So it was quite an upset in that,
yes, I recall
that election.
That. Yes. So it was an interesting change. The other shift that occurs, of course, when you are elected at the municipal level is the potential for changing the number of women at the county level.
Yes, that's right.
Because the warden, if a woman is elected warden, she goes to county council, or mayor, she goes to county council as well.
That's right. So mayor and deputy mayor, we both have seats at county council. And you can ask Arlene Wright, but you know, we don't tend to get that balance at county council that we have had in the municipal councils.
True.
So even when we're successful at the lower tiers, it takes longer for that to filter up, meaning that the women are more likely to be in councillor roles than in those top 2 leadership roles that wind up reflected. Now there's lots of exceptions to that. You know, we've got Kathy Maskell and Ruth Lovell and Deb as well, and Ellen Anderson over in Collingwood. So we have made inroads, but for a community that launched Agnes MacPhail, put the first woman in the House of Commons, and Nellie McClung, we've got this great history of women in politics. And that has been very slow to translate into numbers at local council. There's 13 municipal councils here, so we've got a chance to make a real difference.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, it used to be that school boards were often seen as a place where women would be elected, and I think there are a fair number of women at least on the Blue Water School Board. I know a couple of them, but that's kind of in the past in other jurisdictions I've known women who were elected and then went on to municipal politics, or in some cases on to provincial politics. And that was kind of like the, dare I say it, the farm team, the place
Yeah,
where,
kind
where
of
people
people
got their feet wet.
Yeah.
Exactly, Brenda.
Yeah.
And so, but that changed. And about, I guess, 20 years ago, when all of those the municipal governments were restructured and school boards were restructured.
You were.
And
I think it's still, though, the pattern for any but men or women coming into politics is to first work at the school board trustee level, and then that's how you build your name and
Right.
your reputation in a community, and people get to know the name recognition of you, and then you certainly come up then through to council, mayor, regional chair opportunities, or wardens, and that, or MPs, MPPs.
Yeah.
So I still think that's pretty standard in most
It's
communities.
certainly very common, but there's lots of exceptions, aren't there, Brenda?
course there-
So Brenda totally
I
did
never-
not do the
yeah,
farm
I
team.
didn't.
where did you started right at mayor, did you?
I did. I was having lunch with two female friends, and we were talking about it. And I said, you know, I think I want to run for the municipal government. And my girlfriend said, well, why don't you run for mayor? And I said, that's a great idea. I'm going to run for mayor. And that's how I did it.
No political.
Never been in politics, but I'd been in a community dispute fighting City Hall. So
Ah.
I'd had kind of been on the outside pushing, and I thought it's time to get in and make the changes I thought were necessary for municipal government. I
So you
just-
had a picture of kind of how the system worked. and-
No, well, not really.
Not really?
No, I'd been, I'd presented at council once, so that's kind of all I knew. But I just felt, I'd worked for Revenue Canada, so I kind of had an idea of politics anyway and how systems work. But it wasn't even about that. It was just that I knew I was going to win, and I thought I should do this, and it was my time to step up and do something.
Right. How did you find your support? Where did your support come from?
Yeah.
Was there any way to put a finger on that?
Yeah.
Who were your supporters?
I was in a women's group called Zonta, so it's very, very politically charged women and business women. And when I announced them I was running for mayor, they all were very supportive, so they were kind of my core team. My family were a little surprised because I hadn't talked about it to anybody, so when I told my husband, he was a little surprised, and my
Yes.
daughter, but they were very supportive. And then it was wonderfully a grassroots run organization that just grew. So when people started hearing I was running, and I had a bit of a profile because of this community dispute, people would say to me, hey, I hear you're running for mayor, and I'd yeah. And they say, do you need help? Yeah, I do. And do you need somebody to do a website? Yes, I do. And so it's kind of this beautiful grassroots,
Yeah.
just everybody pulling together and saying, we believe in you, we want to help you. And we had no idea how to run a campaign. Nobody had ever done it.
Yeah.
And we just taught ourselves and learned.
And not with money.
We had no money. Oh, gosh, no.
So
No
against
money.
very well established and deep pocketed competitors.
Oh, yes, yes.
Brenda, I think, really played to her strengths. It was fascinating to watch.
It still
actually.
is quite interesting. I was told when we went to the municipal school in 2005, I was the only woman running for mayor, and I hadn't really thought it was moxie or anything. It was just, I decided to do it. So when women like Kimberly would say, are you really? And I thought, well, yeah, why not? It's like, why not?
Why
Let's
not?
try it. And I was told I needed $30,000 to run the campaign. Well, I had $20 maybe in my bank account.
Right.
And decided, well, we'll figure it out, and we did. And so we ran, I think I had $11,000 that we had raised. And, as people and running, you have to put in your own money.
Yes.
You don't get a large amount of funding. But the two gentlemen I were running against had $60,000 in their coffers. So, but we just prevailed and
coffee
did-
parties
Oh,
and door to
yeah.
door and
Yes, we had a
that
barn dance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We just did it. It was all about people in the community.
Well, it's really interesting that you mentioned that because there was a story within my own family, my mother tells it, of growing up in Ottawa. And her mother would have been of the generation among the first women to be allowed to
Oh,
vote.
yeah.
Right.
And that
1921,
exactly.
December.
Yes. Well, my mother was born in 26, so this was part of. So she would have received the vote, and ever since then, she was very, I would say, politically active in the same way, because she would have. Coffee parties or teas, or they would work together. She would work with other women to, as my mother told a story, we have to elect good people.
Yeah.
good people, because we want to get the very best in there.
I love that.
And sometimes they were women, because I remember
Yeah.
my mother speaking of that, and sometimes they were men.
Yep.
But
But they were good people.
they were good people.
Yeah.
was the-
Yeah.
that
that's
was
funny.
the fun part.
Yeah.
But that was grassroots. It was
Right.
grassroots 101, and it was people talking to people,
Yes.
in the community, at church, in various
That's how it's
community
done.
groups.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how Agnes MacPhail did it. If you know the story of how Agnes MacPhail became the candidate for her party, the voting went on all night while they were trying to figure out who the candidate was going to be. And Agnes was at the end of the list to give the speeches. And they said, well, why don't we just like skip it, because it's just Agnes.
Oh, I've never heard this.
She insisted, of course, on taking the stage, giving the speech, and she won. So she won to be the candidate for the riding of, that time, South Grey. And the next day, they were on to her, they wanted her to step down.
Really?
Well, you can imagine how that was going to go,
I
right?
went over like a
Yeah.
lead balloon.
But
I had the same thing happen. So a gentleman took me for coffee because he really wanted to
Oh,
have a
yes,
discussion with
right.
me, and I was merrily going along becoming the mayor. Right, I was
Yes.
campaigning and things looked pretty positive. He spent hours trying to convince me to step down, that I wasn't good enough and I wasn't smart enough.
and that's not the way it's done.
It's not, yeah, like you, yes, that was it. You
Yeah.
didn't kind of come up through the way you should.
Farm
And then he
team.
said, if you step down, we'll find a better woman than you to run.
Oh, merciful heavens.
I think I said a different word
Yeah.
than that. But, so that it's still out there, and
Yeah.
I always say to people, if you listen to that negativity, because we in Canada tend to want to cut off the
tall poppy.
Tall poppy
poppies.
syndrome. Yes, we tend to be like
So-
Australians.
So
Very much.
back
Like
with
tall
Agnes in
poppy.
1921,
Yeah.
and here's Brenda still dealing
Yeah,
with it, right?
2006, we're still talking like this. And even in 2017, women still are challenged in getting in political
We
positions.
were going to stop at Walmart on our way here and pick up a Barbie, because my friend Catherine McKenna is dealing with climate Barbie. Have you been
Yes.
following this?
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
We
I've
sent
been
her a
following
Barbie
that.
doll, and people ask, why do women not choose a life in politics? We are reminded daily, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I look at that and I think, oh my goodness, no.
What would
no.
Agnes say?
There'd probably be a fairly
Yeah,
short
right. We wouldn't
response.
repeat it here.
No,
Yeah.
no. I can think of a couple myself. We won't go there. But again, that raises the issue of obstacles.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
what obstacles have you both encountered over the years? Traditionalism is one, obviously, and the old guard, if you want to call it
Yeah,
that.
they're still
Yes,
around.
yeah.
There's old guards everywhere still, and there are women sometimes involved in the old guard,
True.
which I think is something we really have to think about as well. But mine was, when I've listened to Kimberly's stories, we have a bit of a different experience. Mine, I didn't think was that bad, because maybe I'm just bullheaded and obstinate. I've been called worse. And I just thought, well, if I want to do this, I have to just face up to it
Yeah.
and do it. And I'd had a lot of experience involved in this grassroots community fight with City Hall, and got a lot of bruises and bumps along the way, and toughened up and got the thick skin needed. But yeah, there were moments when you keep thinking, why am I doing this? But it's something inside, and
Right.
you know that you need to, and you just step up and fill a position that you know you're right for.
There used to be an expression I have heard in politics called having the royal jelly, or the fire in the belly.
Yes.
And I think that while
Yeah.
the idea of that is that you had to have something within, which is what you're saying,
Right.
or Brenda, that you have to have that desire,
Yes.
internal desire
Yeah.
to do it. But you also had support and encouragement.
Absolutely. So you don't get to any place like this without a lot of support and people believing in you and loving you and picking you up along the way and getting you back out there, pushing you back out. And so my success, I look at it as the success of the team of people around me who helped me and believed in me. Because it was just me, I wouldn't be where I am. And I think we always have to remember the people who helped us to fulfill our dreams and get us to where we would really want to be.
Yeah.
So I'm still humbled when somebody comes up to me and said, I voted for you.
Yeah.
It gives
Yes,
me goosebumps.
yes.
Yeah.
It's
I
just
do
the
too.
most privileged feeling in the world.
Yeah.
Have you had how have you felt the impact of social media?
Huge. It's a big one. In 2006, it was just starting.
Yes.
So it wasn't an issue. In 2010, when I ran again, that's when Twitter and things were happening, and people were starting to become bold about lashing out and saying things to you. And then now, I mean, you of course have to be very, very social media savvy, but you still have to do the door-to-door knocking. That's where the votes are, and it's not on Twitter and Facebook. And I think a lot of politicians are forgetting that it's, I say, Ma and Pa Waterloo. Who are the voters? And you need to face them and talk to them on their doorstep. So you can't run a political campaign on social media. It helps. But I've also have taken opportunities to make statements to people who are very cruel to me on social media, and then profess to be your friend, which, you know,
Right.
it's kind of a surprise when
Yeah.
you've just read this nasty tweet that they would post, and then they're hugging and kissing you. And I've often said openly about not naming their names, but if they're sitting there saying, I just don't understand how people can say terrible things about you on Twitter and then profess to be your friend. And I've had people sit beside me and they don't know what to do. So it's an interesting study of human nature, and you have to become thick-skinned and not let it get to you. You can't take anything personal like that.
Yeah.
There's an old expression that I've encountered called, actually it's an acronym, INAY. It's not always about you.
Oh, it's very true. And it very seldom is,
Yeah.
right?
We did have a social media component at our Run Jane Run school,
Yes.
which I think was very helpful because,
It
as Brenda
was.
says, people will use social media maybe because they're not facing you to say the most hateful things,
Yeah.
things that they would
Yes.
never say to
Yes.
you personally.
Yes, they hide behind
There's
it.
there's an ability to say those things on social media. So being really smart about social media, I think, is an important part of
Yeah.
running a campaign.
And you know, even now, when I post on Twitter and Facebook, and I have fairly significant followings, I'm very careful about what I post. I don't want to get into fights with anybody on Twitter. It's just not necessary, and it doesn't accomplish anything.
Yep.
So I'm very
It's
careful.
funny, I've actually withdrawn from Twitter.
I hear that
because
a lot. Yeah.
because I found that being time consuming is one thing. I didn't have a lot to say on Twitter.
Very true.
And I realized if I don't have much to say, the medium that I'm using, well, maybe I need to change medium.
Very true.
you could
Yeah.
start a war in North Korea on Twitter.
Oh, you can.
Yeah.
There are lessons to be learned.
Oh,
in
absolutely.
How and how not to use social media, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, Twitter is actually not, we discovered in the course of the campaign, this is 2 years ago now, Twitter is not one of the platforms of choice in this particular area. Facebook very
would
much
think
is.
Yes.
But, you know, you will get advice from the party about, you know, the tools at your disposal. But in a rural area, Facebook is very successful.
Yeah.
And Twitter just doesn't really have enough in this area to be meaningful.
That's right.
So you're fine to not be on Twitter, David.
Well, that's good. That's good. Actually, I still follow Twitter because it's the one place I discovered where I can keep up with politicians.
Very true.
Right.
Yeah.
If you want to find out what's going on,
Yes,
say at even the media, they will post important statements or decisions within minutes of them happening,
Yes.
like
Yeah,
an account,
very
like at a city
timely.
council. It's incredibly timely.
Yeah.
So you can get up the next morning and say, yeah, okay, that's not the end of the world.
Well, I usually check if the end of the world happened while I was sleeping. When I wake up on Twitter, like, what's happened? I slept for 5 hours.
Yes, and that's true because we just don't know what is happening halfway around
That's
the world,
so
do
true.
we? It's absolutely crazy. So what else to happen at the Run Jane Run School? What others? You covered media, and you had obviously some success stories.
We did. We had traditional media as well as social media. We talked about sort of the basics of a campaign. The whole objective of the Run Jane Run School is to level the playing field. Our view has been that you know, short of a quota system that insists that we have 50% women, if we give women the same tools as men, the women can fight those races successfully. So our objective with Run Jane Run, it was very practical. There was a little bit of, cheerleading, hurrah, hurrah, you can do this, but a lot of very practical advice on how to run a campaign.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and also about public speaking.
Public speaking is very
yes.
important, and
Speaking is
debate.
important,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it was really a well-run day. And I'm not saying that because I was there. I'm saying it because I mean it. I've been to several of them, and I found this one to be very, it was authentic.
Yes.
And it was real. There weren't people standing there and trying to glamorize something, but to just say, here's the reality. This is what you have to do. And women stayed through the whole day, and at the end of the day said, this is the best day we've ever had.
Yeah.
That's a success.
A lot of women don't know how to run. So they would not know, for example, that there is a nomination period, there's a sequence of events,
Yeah.
where you go to pick up the papers, that there are papers
Yeah.
that you have to
Yeah.
pick up. There are things that are expected. They don't know who to ask questions of. And once you provide them with those tools, there's no shortage of women who
Yeah.
are willing to take up that role. It was interesting that in the last campaign school, we had Carolyn Bennett as our keynote speaker.
yes,
We had
yes.
Brenda this time. Carolyn Bennett started as a community activist. She had a big fight on her hands in the community. And at that point, the same as Brenda, wound up being sort of pushed into politics. And of
Yeah.
course is now our Minister for Indigenous Affairs.
Yes,
so
I've-
she's had
I've-
a long career in federal politics.
I've met Carolyn and I've heard her speak in a setting incredibly effective, incredibly effective, and I think is doing a pretty good job as Indigenous Affairs Minister. Yeah.
Well, one of her observations is that women often choose a political life because there's something in their community that needs resolving, and they step up and take leadership in that, and that translates into a political career. Oftentimes, she says. By contrast, men will reach a certain stage in their professional life and community life, and then step up to that last step. It's something that happens sort of as a natural trajectory. Women very rarely follow that same
Yeah, we don't think
path.
like that. It's different. It's a different reasoning about why you want to get involved, because for women you put so much at risk. You risk your families because they're all of a sudden thrown into the turmoil and the
And
life.
nobody
of
ever
politics.
asks a man that question.
I
What
know.
about your kids?
Yeah.
They never ask a man that
How are you
kind
going
of
to
thing.
manage your cooking and shopping and buying groceries? Like, well, that's why I'm married. It's like this amazing person who can do that with me.
We've had that conversation, and we figured out how, as a family, we're going to do
Absolutely.
this. But they never ask men that
No.
that question.
No.
It's interesting because I remember a number of years ago in another community that I lived in, I happened to know one of the leading members of the provincial Conservative Party locally. I used to jokingly refer to him as the local bagman. Because
dear.
he was very politically connected. He's both at the municipal and the provincial level, and retired farmer, and all those wonderful things. But I remember him saying, when we were talking politics, that he said, the one thing I have to say for any candidate, doesn't matter who they are, unless they've got a supportive, he was thinking, he's an older man, he was saying, unless they've got a supportive wife and family behind them, they're not going to work.
That's absolutely the
But it's the
case.
same kind of
Absolutely.
thinking.
Oh,
that
yes.
it's framed in a different way, but it's the same. And I think he's absolutely right. Having known a number of politicians over the years, the successful politician, the one who does well, does it because they've got that supportive family.
Yeah.
It was one of the conversations, in fact, that we had on our day, is the importance of making sure that your family is on board.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have that, it's just not possible to do
No,
what
it's
you need
not.
to do to be a
There's- yeah, you
candidate.
can't.
Yeah. And I look at the by-election that's being held down in Toronto. Was it Toronto, one of the Scarborough ridings, where Arnold Chan, I believe, passed away. He died of
Yes.
cancer, and his wife,
Jean. Yes.
Jean
Yep.
Yip, is running. And I'm thinking, wow, that's
Yeah.
quite the step.
But that is
But I'm
not
sure
actually
she's
a
gotta
big
have
step.
well,
that is actually a small step for Jean, because Jean and Arnold worked so closely together that Jean would be capable of stepping into that probably better than anyone else they could find as a candidate.
And what a great way to honor her husband's
Oh, yes.
Right.
Legacy.
legacy.
Yeah.
Great. Fabulous. Fabulous. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about, Brenda, too, is what happens when you don't follow the expected course or path as mayor. Do you get a lot of criticism for that, and do you have to, did you find that you took a lot of criticism for those kinds of things?
People were actually quite sweet and supportive. Because I think at the time when I ran, that there were two gentlemen mayors, or an incumbent mayor and a returning mayor, and so I was totally different. So they would fight, and then I'd sit there and wait because I was, just another person sitting on stage. And I was really, the local media had no interest in me. I was totally ignored by the media personnel. I was called Barbara Hall, and it was
Kept getting her name wrong.
Yes, I know.
I was always called a different name. So. No, I don't recall getting that criticism. Just that one person really pushed back. Yeah. And then you do hear there's these little whisper campaigns, or people will come up to you and think they're telling you really good advice when it's crushing advice. Yeah. Because they want to. But it's up to you whether you decide to take that on and let it destroy your dream or move on. And so I do a lot of motivational speaking and coaching of people, and I say, when people tell you something, you take what you need and you discard the rest and you just keep going. Yeah. And don't lose sight of where you're heading. And if you do, then that's your fault. And so you just tell people, or they'll tell you something negative, you say, thanks for that feedback. And you just turn around and walk away, right?
I've heard that so many times that I've done it myself.
That.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
That's great. You walk away thinking, I'll never take that advice. But, but you have to really be ready for that. Yeah. But I think it's easing up a bit. I think people are less critical of people in politics because of social media, because they have different outlets, and they are seeing people in a different way too. They're starting to see people, they're real, they have families, they see a personal side of them on social media. So it was really a wonderful experience of running the first campaign. The second campaign was different because I was then the incumbent, and 3 men ran against me.
Yes.
So that was a bit different, and I made sure I always stayed positive and happy, and whenever they wanted to nail me on something, I always praised them for being great people. What are they going to say?
Well, exactly. Right? Thank you for raising that. That's a good.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the feedback.
Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah. It's in some ways, there are a lot of parallels. In other ways, it is different. The glass ceiling is, this glass table is still there. Yep. Still there. So,
but we've bumped against it, and we've made some big cracks. And we're showing leadership to all women who are in positions that Kimberly and I have been in, and who knows what's next. We're cracking that glass ceiling, and I think we've got some significant women and younger people coming up, and we need to support them. And I think that's the next thing we always need to be talking about, is we need to support our younger people coming up.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to talk about that and other things in the next half hour.
Okay.
I'm David Shearman. This is Politically Speaking, and we'll be right back. Hi, and welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman. My guests are Brenda Halloran and Kimberly Love, and we're talking about the Run Jane Run campaign school and women in politics in general. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, just while we were talking there on the break, actually, Kimberly, you made the comment that our Indigenous communities do a lot better at this, of including women in governance than let's say, to use the term that's often used, the settler community. What can you expand on that a bit?
Well, it was a surprise to me, actually, when we were sort of reaching out and looking at, and we did this as we were coming up to Run Jane Run, taking a look at the local councils and seeing how women were represented. So there are 13 different municipal councils in the riding. 2 of those are band councils at our 2 First Nations communities, and I was surprised to see they actually had, I think at the time, both of them more women than men. Certainly, I think at Cape Croker there were more women than men, and so we asked one of the women politicians there, and she says, "Oh no, that's the norm." Actually, that women see themselves very naturally in leadership roles in those First Nations communities. So not that the fight is done, but we've got some lessons that we can maybe learn from our First Nations neighbors on having women at the table. It's about the diversity of perspective, I think. Women bring a different perspective to communities.
Oh, yeah.
There was that really interesting study when we went to the first campaign school that Brenda and I attended, where they were asking men and women about infrastructure. Did you hear about this? And so men would always talk about, roads and sewers, and that was infrastructure to them. And women talked about those things, but they also added what we would call social infrastructure. So they were concerned about childcare and safe school crossings and libraries and things that a community needed as part of its infrastructure for a healthy community. And that was a bit of an aha moment for me, where I realized that women have a different perspective on community, and how valuable would it be if we could have that at every council table. Many councils in our region, and it would appear that the more rural the community, the more likely it's the case that women have a harder time finding their way to the council table. Some councils entirely men over a term or two. And I think that if we're 50% of the population, that we need to address that in the representation at those council tables. So the First Nations have a lesson to teach us there, I think.
That was actually drawn very clear to me in a very interesting series on APTN, the Aboriginal Television Network, which was called, believe it or not, Aboriginal Police Files. And the whole setup, it's a show that's in repeats now, but the whole setup was a police service in central BC, entirely composed of obviously of an Indigenous community. But the chief officer, not the chief officer was a woman. Very experienced police officer herself. But she was named to be the chief officer of the police service. And the approach to policing was so different. And she had a number of men who were police officers, who were her staff, and my golly, they took a totally different approach to policing, dealing with things like spousal abuse. They were serious about it, but they had a very, very different approach. Criminal behavior, the way they approached young people, very, very different. I was really eye-opening. It's 13 weeks, if anybody gets APTN, worth watching if you can find it. Worth watching. But Brenda, I was going to also ask you, how much of a learning curve was there for you as you took office? You jumped right into the big chair.
I did.
Oh, and it was a very big chair.
What was the learning curve?
It was a big chair. It was massive. It was, when I look back, it was just something I had no idea. I think maybe if I'd known, I might have been a little more like, what have I done? But I remember when they put the chain of office on, and all of a sudden it hit home that I was the mayor. And that night, I do have a good story to tell. So at City Hall, they had a big party, and I get the chain of office on. And for some reason, I was left alone in City Hall. Everybody had gone home, lights were off, and I was standing there with a dried up sandwich. And I went down to the mayor's office, and it was actually the first time I'd really been in it. And I sat in the mayor's chair and I put my feet up on the desk. It just felt right. And I looked out of the window and it was snowing and it was dark, and I thought, oh my God, I'm the mayor of Waterloo. Like, oh my gosh. And
with your dried up sandwich.
With my dried up sandwich. And I thought,
this heavy weight on your shoulder too, because those things aren't light.
And I thought, I can do this. I can do this. It's just learning a new job. So, I mean, of course, again, it goes back to incredibly supportive people, the staff, the CAO, senior management team. They all just, they carried on, and I caught up as fast as I could.
I think one of the things that I've learned over the years is that the success of an elected politician is directly related to the staff that support them.
Right.
Oh,
They
yes.
are I mean, if you've got a good CAO or clerk in a smaller municipality that knows what they're doing and can give you the advice you need, and you take it.
And you take it. Good point.
I have heard it said more than once by politicians who've been elected. They said, I didn't realize we couldn't do that.
I think most people are shocked by what you can't do.
Yeah.
And as a person, when you're the mayor, everybody assumes you can just do anything you want.
Yeah.
But you're just one vote at council. And it's how you manage your council and how you have those conversations together and work together to resolve something for the community. And I know that there are challenges in mayors and councils and all across Canada where they're not working well together. And it's so important because you're there to serve the community, not yourself. And I think people need to put the egos, get rid of the egos, park them at the door, and just look at why am I here, why did I run, and what is the ultimate goal.
Yeah. The other thing that I've had politicians, municipal politicians, say on this show is that the real work is done in committees. That the committee work, at least at this in this area,
different
that
levels,
maybe
yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
in a city like Waterloo is very different.
Yes.
But in this area, it's the committee work that is so critical, and that the decisions are made at the committees, and then the discussion happens at council, but not a lot of discussion sometimes, unless it's a really contentious issue. Like taxes, or we can come up with a dozen issues.
Always contentious.
Always contentious.
They're always too much.
Yeah, but and if people want to engage, the volunteers, at least on committees, are probably a pretty good place to get your feet wet.
Very much, and I always encourage people to attend council meetings to see if this is really what you want to sign up for 4 years, because it might seem glamorous. You might think I'm a councillor, I'm a mayor, but it's a lot of work, and you never have a day off, and there are days sometimes it's really boring because you're talking about bylaws and pipes underground and things that really aren't exciting but are so critical to a community. So I always say go to some council meetings. If you stay awake, that's a good sign. And then join a committee, and if you find that exciting, talking about pipes and water and sewage and all these exciting things, because a lot of municipal work is infrastructure work. And then of course the soft services, as childcare, the library systems, playgrounds, things like that. So you really need to understand the process of municipal government and not just decide you're going to run because you're going to change that street light on your street. You can't be a one-issue person.
Right.
You need to
Yeah.
really be able to explain to somebody and have an elevator speech, why are you running?
Yep.
But Brenda, also, you joined just before, in your first year, was it, that Waterloo was named most intelligent
yes,
community.
yeah.
So beyond the underground pipes and all those things that have to happen,
Big stuff too.
there is visionary work
Yeah,
as
huge
well, and
visionary
you need to be thinking about the future of your
Yes,
community.
yeah.
Brenda took the role at a time when Waterloo was in the midst of quite a lot of financial
big
turmoil,
crisis,
a big
yes.
crisis.
A lot of litigation and
And
money issues.
And that often happens. Carolyn Bennett says if you watch women politicians, they will often be taking the reins when there's a big crisis.
Yeah.
Not as if, well, the men have sort of given it up and they're throwing it to a woman because how much worse could it possibly get? But, Agnes McPhail said it's a woman's job to be cleaning up, whether it's at home or in the house.
You get a
And
sign
I was
that
thinking,
says-
I was
But when
thinking
you
about
think about
Brenda
it,
and
she
that mess she inherited.
It was,
But Agnes
did.
Phil herself did that when you think of the correctional services.
yes, she
Absolutely.
She
did.
walked into the inn, was
did.
absolutely horrified
Yeah.
by what she saw in Kingston Penitentiary, and brought about major change in the correctional services. And the
I'm
whole
so glad that you
Canada.
used that word because we now call it correctional services. They called it penal services.
Oh, yes.
true.
yes.
Before
Yeah.
Agnes got started, right? It was about retribution, right? That's what justice
Yeah.
meant.
Yeah.
And now we have a completely different view
Yeah.
of that system, and we call it corrections, not the penal system.
Right.
And that was really Agnes McPhail.
The other phrase that is more current is restorative
Restorative
justice,
justice.
Right.
as opposed to retributive justice.
Yes,
Right.
and that actually came out of Elmira, a case in Elmira of 2 young men who had damaged some properties, and then they were made to go and face the people and say sorry and make amends.
Yeah.
And that all goes into mediation and community work.
Yep.
And I think that's where, further to Kimberly's point, is where women look at things in that sense, more from a restorative type of lens instead of punitive. Or like when I became mayor, we replaced an all-male mayor and council, and we came in with 5 new councillors and 3 returning, but we were 4 women and 4 men. And then the
interesting.
next council in 2010 were 5 women and 3 men. and we had the highest percentage of women on council in Canada.
And they were all graduates of the campaign school. That's
all
when
were,
I thought
yeah,
they were
we
on
all
to
were.
something.
We
We
all
can do
were.
this.
Yeah. I think the other thing that needs to be said as well, though I didn't say it earlier, this is a non-partisan.
Yes.
Oh,
That's
yes,
It is.
absolutely.
Because that's one of the things about municipal politics is that it is in Canada, it is by and large, with the exception of perhaps
Yeah.
some of the major centers like Montreal and Toronto, partisan free. You're not labeled
No.
as a particular part with a particular party
That's right.
label. You are a person. You are there because you're a citizen,
Yes.
a taxpayer, a property owner, whatever. So that you're able to do that. I think with a lot less baggage.
Oh, for sure.
They're unapologetically there to represent their community.
Yeah.
There is nothing
Yeah.
else
Yeah.
beyond that. in terms
People
of
would ask me, what party are you with? And I said, none. And, well, who do you support? I said, anybody who gives me a check. I love that party that day, right? So I thought that was pretty,
As long as you're within the
yeah,
Donald
answer.
Trump
Yeah.
says that
as
too.
long as
That's
the, as long as the integrity commissioner doesn't have
That's
anything to say.
right. It's a check for new pipes underground. We love you right that moment.
Right.
You're-
Right.
That's funny.
How do you find your relationships might be different with developers or with people who want something from the city?
Oh, that's a great question. So when I became mayor, the first thing I did was inform the developers in my community that I will not have lunches or dinners with you, and I will not attend golf tournaments or do anything with you. But I can't wait till you come to City Hall and sit with me and the CAO and the senior planning staff and look at what you're going to build in my city. And that took it all away. And they actually thanked me and said, now we know it's an equal playing field.
Yeah.
You know, and because you have to be very careful of those relationships and the perception. And it would be very easy if it was somebody you'd known as friends, and then all of a sudden you had to vote against it
Yeah.
or stand against it. So I always remained neutral, but really excited about the vision they were bringing to my community and how maybe I could add something to it and offer suggestions of things, and they would take it.
In other words, you turned the tables by bringing everyone to a level
All the
playing
table.
field, and it was your table as mayor,
Yes, yes,
which is hopefully what it should be.
I think so. Yeah.
Hasn't always been though.
Oh no,
Well, every
no,
community
got it,
has its stories, right, and legacies of things. But for me, politics is all about integrity and
Yeah.
your values. And I was once asked by a reporter, "How do you make your decisions?" And I said, "Well, I base it on my values and morals and ethics." And there was dead silence. And he said, "I've never heard any politician say that." And I said, "Well, then we're in trouble because that's what it should be." So I really enforced that thinking. And I always would say, when I make a decision, and if I can look in the mirror and like who's looking back at me, I made the right decision.
Yep. Which, well, the obvious contrast is what's going on in the U.S.
Oh,
right
yes,
now, but
yeah.
we won't go there.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, I think that actually we should go there, to be honest. I think that what we're looking at in the U.S. has been a call to action to women,
I think so.
because
Yeah.
we've seen an extreme in that administration, and I think that women are.
Something's happening. As
There's
you know,
a
with the Me Too
reaction.
campaign and the Women's March campaign, there is something happening. And now the women coming forward with their complaints of sexual harassment. Matt Lauer this morning.
Yes.
I couldn't
Shocking
believe
news,
that.
right? You're
Yeah.
still in a state.
Well,
shock.
yeah, and Al Franken, I can't.
But
Yeah.
this is, I think, opening the doors to. There's a lot going to happen over the next time. What I love is men like you and my husband and the men in my life who say they're appalled and shocked and had no idea that women would be going through this because they're not of that ilk. Every single woman that any of us know has had something happen to her.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would agree. And I would say I'm shocked and appalled,
Yeah.
but not because I haven't seen it.
Yes.
And I have seen it. I've been horrified by it
Yeah.
for decades. My father, I remember actually a story where my parents were having a meeting with my grade 5 teacher in Quebec. And the grade 5 teacher disclosed to my parents, she was very upset, and my father asked, "Well, what's wrong?" And she said, "I just wish that principal would keep his hands off me."
Oh my goodness.
That was in the early 1960s in Quebec. So you think of what, that's
Unbelievable.
in the educational system. But that's not unusual. It is happening, and now
Yeah.
we're talking about it. We're getting it out on the table, and we're saying that's not acceptable
Yeah, yeah.
at all.
And we need the men to be supporting all of us who are coming forward with any of these stories.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's reassuring, I think, to women to see men stepping up because it is a male issue, right? And so we can't just say, oh, we can't be blaming and so negative and vindictive. It has to be done with, this is not, we can't tolerate this anymore. It's not acceptable. Has to change. Let's move forward and stop this.
Yeah, in my own work, the approach has been, this is the line, you cross the line, there are consequences,
Yes.
but you stay on this side of the line, these are the boundaries, which is the technical word we use, these are the boundaries, and you keep to the boundaries.
Yes.
And the other stuff that you either, you accept the consequences, make amends and move forward, but you don't disbelieve. You just don't disbelieve.
so true.
That's you have to believe.
Yeah,
you
so
have to
true.
listen, because no one comes forward with these kinds of accusations generally out of a frivolity or
That's right.
whatever. It just does. It's not usual.
So that's why I think we're at an important moment for women, really.
Yep.
I think that the Trump, the behavior of Trump
Yeah.
and his ilk have created, a strengthening of resolve among
think
women,
so.
particularly among young women. So we did have a couple of young women who attended the Run Jane
good. I
Run
was gonna ask you
school.
that.
And so that's always exciting to see
Yes.
young women having maybe seen other women in political office start to say, I could do that, right?
Or maybe they can apply the principles to their high school or college council or some kind of elected office. I hate to say it, even in a community group or club.
Right.
Leadership, leadership's all across the board,
or
right?
principle, leadership can be offered anywhere.
Yes.
Right.
I think too of some of the young women who were probably inspired recently by Barack Obama's wife. Trying to think, or just
Michelle
Michelle Obama.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh my,
she's
just drew a blank.
amazing.
I heard so many positive
Yeah, she
interviews
is
about
something.
that.
Yeah.
That recent appearance in Toronto at the Mattamy Center, and that kind of empowerment of women, not just women, but women of color,
Yes.
women of minorities, women
Right.
of all kinds of diverse groups. That's important for her to speak and to give that leadership.
I think that they're standing up. It's when somebody tells you you can't do something. If you want to activate a teenager,
Yeah, don't
So, yeah, that's right.
No, you can't do
You
that.
can't do that.
And
So-
then go out and turn around and do it.
So if you've got an establishment that's saying, well, women don't belong here, you can bet that they're going to rise
Yeah.
up and seize those positions.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good opportunity for women in this community to take leadership. Having been a federal candidate I was on the ground for more than 6 years, I've seen a lot of women in important leadership roles in their communities. There is no shortage of capable women ready to run.
Yeah.
Young women, older women, lots to contribute. So it's a great thing to imagine that if we can provide them with the tools, that we can actually make a real difference in the lives of the women and the lives of the community here.
Yeah, and we have examples. Hazel McCallion,
Yeah.
Charlotte Whitten,
Yep.
Barbara Hall, and many other.
Kim Campbell?
Kim Campbell, yes. And I noticed Montreal has just elected a
They
woman
did.
as mayor.
Woman mayor.
Yeah,
That's
That was big.
remarkable. I grew up in Montreal, and
Yeah.
I'm thinking, this is a long, long way
Yeah.
from the 1960s.
We don't have a woman president yet, but I guess
No,
they were
it'll
working
come.
on
Or
that.
we need a woman prime minister.
It'll
That's
come.
time.
Yeah.
It'll come.
Yeah.
I believe
I know
it'll
it will come.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It may not be this cycle or the next. I believe it'll come certainly in my lifetime and probably within yours.
I think so.
I think that's very reasonable.
It's interesting that you pointed out that women are often trustees in the Board of Education,
Yeah.
that they find a natural home there. There is in politics a sense of the hard portfolios and the soft
Yes.
portfolios, which I'm sure you're aware of. And it's been common as women find their way into those leadership roles that they're given the soft portfolios.
Yeah.
So things like education or health that are intended to sort of naturally go to a woman's
Yeah.
strength. I'd really like to see a woman in charge of defense would be a good one. Finance would be a good one. Although I think maybe Barbara McDougall held finance
Yes,
for a while.
yes.
yes, she
Yeah.
did. She
But
did.
those are the so-called, hard portfolios
You
that
have to.
we really like to see
Indigenous
women.
Affairs is a hard portfolio.
That is a hard portfolio.
a very hard portfolio. So
But I mean, it's about hard and soft.
Oh,
If
true. Yeah.
if it involves feelings, then women are put into those roles. There's a funny story about Agnes MacPhail going, and she was a representative to the United Nations, and they had, of course, all men representatives at the United Nations at the time she was there, but they had programs for the wives. And so they were, I think, trying to funnel Agnes into something that was soft, probably just for the wives. And then I can't remember what they asked her to do, to sit on some committee, but it was about something she had no interest in. And so she muscled her way in with the men on the committee that she was most interested in.
What a
but,
woman.
asserting herself,
Yeah,
at a time. And women are still in a position, I think, where they need to,
I agree.
I think, assert themselves
I
into
agree.
those roles.
well, when you think of Eleanor Roosevelt in the
Oh,
U.S.,
she was great,
who was
yeah.
another strong
Thatcher.
woman, Margaret Thatcher, although some
think
of her
we don't-
economics,
let's not go there.
some of her economics
Yeah.
are questionable.
True.
But you've got other examples of women. Angela Merkel.
But we're only saying one woman, and there's
There's
millions
many.
of men
Oh.
though that are in those positions, and we can name women, but we don't have that thing about naming. There was a man who did this. There was a man. So
Amen.
we have we
So when
need
it's
to-
not news,
That's right.
then we'll have arrived.
That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people don't say, "Oh, look, it's a
We had
woman
one
mayor in
woman doing
Montreal."
that, Yeah.
Yeah, well,
No, we've got a new mayor in Montreal.
it's a new mayor, but I think we have to remember too. It's that first one that'll break
Absolutely.
the ice.
Yes.
I agree.
And then subsequently, it'll become okay. Yeah. So what?
Yeah.
They're the premier, they're the prime minister, they're the mayor,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yes.
I mean, Governor General is another case in point where we have had several women.
Yes.
We
and,
have.
and very excellent Governor Generals.
Jean Sauvé.
Jean Sauvé was the first one, and then, Michel Jean,
Adrian Clarkson.
Adrian Clarkson, our
Gilles
current,
Payette.
yes. So on and on it goes.
It does.
So.
But I think you want to thank women politicians if you know one. That's a great lesson because they're the ones who are leading the team. So our younger people, our younger women are looking at those women and saying, I could do that.
Absolutely.
I could be the
Yeah.
Governor General. I could
Yep.
be a counselor in my local council. I could do that. So those women often, and Brenda and I are testament to that, have it's not an easy route that
Nope,
you
but it's
choose when you do
great.
this, but it is great.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's an experience that I'm so glad that I was able to have. And I always say to people when I speak to them, I always say, if I can do it, you can do it.
Sure.
I'm nobody special, but I had a dream and I followed it,
Yeah.
and I did it.
Well, we're coming up on an election in a year.
Yes.
Are you still
Yeah.
thinking about next?
You
your
never
next term?
know what life has in store for people.
She's retired now.
You never.
So you're not going to go back into the game.
Not at this stage. Yeah, I have other things that I'm doing, but I became a grandmother, and so that changes things a lot
Sure.
of where you want to spend your time right now.
Yeah.
So, but I'm just putting things, on a shelf, and who knows, right?
That's right. You never
Who
know.
knows,
You
Kimberly,
never
where
know.
we're going to end up.
You never know. It's a fascinating conversation because, and I hope that people who are watching, if you have questions, I'm sure that is it the Run Jane Run website has
That's
got
right.
contact
So
information.
runjanerun.ca, and
Yeah.
we are actually preparing a spring networking session. We did this the last time as well, because that nomination day, as that comes up, which will be next spring, that's nomination day is the day in which you have to have your nominations in, and at that point, kind of the rubber hits the road.
Yes.
And so we found it very valuable to get those women together again with a couple of experienced women politicians, and they can ask very specific questions about how do I handle this? What should I do about that? And so we created really a network of women the last time who were able to share information, ask questions of one another, because that period from nomination day till election day you know,
quick,
there's a
goes by very
lot going
fast,
along.
yeah.
There's a lot going
Yeah.
on. Yeah. So.
And the municipal election date has been moved back a bit.
It's into May now.
Yeah, because they moved the election date back into mid-October.
Yeah, yeah, but
As
they've
a-
really shortened the time now.
Yes.
When you can
They have,
campaign.
yes, that's
because
right.
it used to be that people started in the December of the year before, and the speculation and the gossip and the
Right, and then in 1st of January, I think it went with the calendar year you could
did.
announce.
Yeah.
But now, yeah, the
Thanks, better.
nomination day is tightened.
Well, and if you look at part of that was probably due to what was going on in Toronto with the Ford campaign announcing on the 1st of
Oh,
January. And
yeah.
They had to do something to change the
Yeah,
municipal
it's
act.
really, it
Right.
gets to be a bit of a gong show. Because you've got people, I was having people ask me in November
Yeah.
for the next year, when are you running, what are you doing? And the media was adding to that
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
So when people were kind of saying, well, maybe they'd write a huge story about it. And so it was even hard to stay within the guidelines, because you're not supposed to say anything until that,
Yeah, you're not allowed to
that
campaign
January,
prior
until
to.
that time. So, yeah.
So there will be a spring networking session, and there's no obligation to have been to the previous school. We had people who joined us for the spring networking session who hadn't been part of the previous school. So any woman who's interested in running for municipal council or running for school board can still contact us through the runjanerun.ca, and we'll be sending out invitations for that session.
Super, super. Well, I want to thank the both of you for coming on Politically Speaking and talking about this experience. It sounds exciting, and I wish the both of you every good wish for the future. Brenda Halloran, Kimberly Love, thank you. And thank you, friends, for being a part of Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman. See you next time.